Hey everyone, welcome to episode 8 of The Spotlight. I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for tuning in. Have you ever thought about what you would do if you became incredibly wealthy? I mean, you have a bank account with a ton of zeros, just a truckload of cash. I've got an idea for you. See, how you and I handle our finances today is probably how we're going to handle our riches tomorrow. And if that is true, we need to set up a strong financial foundation. And the key to that is generosity. Stick around, we're going to talk about it. So the Apostle Paul is writing a letter to Timothy. Timothy is his young Padawan. He's trying to train him up to lead the church. And at the end of his first letter to Timothy, at the very end of it, he starts to instruct Timothy on what Timothy is supposed to instruct the rich people in his church, what they're supposed to do. And so this is how it picks up. So if you got a Bible, go to 1 Timothy chapter 6, and we'll pick it up in verse 17. And it starts this way. Paul says this, "Command those who are rich in this present world." And normally whenever I read this text, I think this thought, and I'm pretty sure you do as well, it's kind of like, whew, I'm off the hook because I'm not rich. Because I look at the people next to me and I see what they're making, and I go, oh man, well, I don't drive that, and my house isn't that big, and I don't wear those clothes. And I immediately think, whew, I'm off the hook. This is just going to be great information that maybe one day I'll use if I ever become incredibly wealthy. But the truth of the matter is, we're all rich. And if you make more than $35,000 in a year, you are the top 1% of the world. Congratulations, give yourself a hand. You made it. You are filthy rich. You are incredibly rich if you make over $35,000 a year. Because on the world standards, wow, they look at us and they go, that is amazing. You have 2 cars? 2 cars? And they're newer? Like they're not even 10 years old and you have 2 cars. That is incredible. And the problems and insecurities that you and I have when it comes to our wealth, because compared to the people around us, we might not be at the top. The rest of the world looks at us and goes, man, you got to be kidding me. I would love to have your financial struggles. And so the truth is this. Number one, I'd love you to take notes, but number one, it's this. We're all rich. We just don't feel like it. Because like I said, we compare ourselves to our neighbors or just our neighborhood. And then along came social media, and along came a little app called Instagram. And no longer are we comparing or really competing with our neighbors. Now we're comparing and competing our lifestyle, our livelihood, our finances, our richness, our wealth. We're comparing that to not just the people around us, we're now comparing that to the people across the U.S. and even into other countries. But we're not comparing with the globe, with the world. Because if we were, we would circle back and know that we are, in fact, incredibly wealthy. And so this letter that Paul is writing to Timothy, instructing Timothy to talk about and teach the rich people in his congregation, that's you and I. So let's focus in, let's pay attention. There's something in here for us. He goes on in verse 17, "Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides for us with everything for our enjoyment." So number 2, it is God who provides for our enjoyment, not our stuff. And I get this mixed up all the time. And in fact, Christmas is probably the best example of this, because every year around Christmas time, I make a list. It's my wish list. It's the list of wants that, man, my life would be better. It would have more joy if I only had these 35 things on my list. I make a big list every year, and I'm pretty sure you do as well. Some of those items are really big and expensive, and some of them are really practical, like socks, because you just need socks. And besides, the grandparents need something to buy, right? So that's what we do. So I make the list. It's a massive list, and every year I open up the presents, and I get the majority of the stuff on my list, and I am excited. And if you have kids, you've purchased presents for them off of their wish list as well, right? And they open it up and you see it. They're just beaming from ear to ear, just a huge smile, and they're so excited. And then what happens 2 weeks later? The joy fades, doesn't it? You no longer get as excited as you once did when you first opened up the present, when you first played with the toy for the very first time. That's because God never designed us to find joy and satisfaction in our stuff, in our presents, in our material possessions. The joy and satisfaction comes from knowing Him and the blessing that He has given us, which are all the toys and the material possessions and all of that. See, we're not supposed to find our joy and satisfaction in the thing, but the giver of the thing that we're enjoying. This is really important because you and I could get to the end of our lives and we could accumulate so much stuff, and we keep getting and keep getting and keep getting and keep getting because we're trying to experience joy. We're trying to get excitement and just fun and happiness out of our material possessions. And if we do not know God, if we do not know the giver of the gift, that joy will fade constantly. So Paul's telling a young man named Timothy, hey, the older people in your congregation that are rich, tell them that their joy, their satisfaction, their enthusiasm for life, it will not last in their possessions or in the zeros in their bank account. It comes and it stays from God. You can't get it from anywhere else. Keep going, verse 18. He says, command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. See, in the first century, as Paul is writing this to Timothy and his congregation, man, the cultural understanding of richness was this, that you would hoard everything that you had, and you were rich because A, God loved you and was smiling on you, and B, you were not generous. You hoarded everything. In fact, when you had people come over to work your land or to sell your goods, you would find excuses not to pay them the full wage at the end of the day. Everybody knew this, but what could you do? You're a peasant. You had no money. You couldn't afford a lawyer. You couldn't start a riot or just, rise up. That you'd be squashed by all the wealthy people. And so this is how it is. And so Paul is telling Timothy, hey, you need to instruct these people to be rich in good deeds, not rich in material possessions, because that doesn't do anything. That doesn't raise other people's lifestyle up. So be rich in good deeds and be willing to share the stuff that you have. So number 3 in your notes, do for one what you wish you could do for everyone. Because the truth is this, you only have a certain amount of money. You can't give to everybody. You can't share with everybody. You can't help everybody. There's only so much time in the day. You only have so many material possessions. You can't do it all. But you and I, we have to do for one person what we wish we could do for everybody. When you look at issues of poverty, wealth inequality, homelessness, you and I don't have the resources to solve those issues on our own. We're just called to do our part. And that may be helping one person who's homeless, helping one person who's in the poverty level, one person whose business has had to close during this whole COVID-19 thing. That's our job. And if I do my part, and if you do your part, and if your friends do their part, and my friends do their part, all of a sudden we're actually making a dent in some of these huge global issues. But we have to do what we would love to do for everybody. We have to do that for one person. And it's not just writing a check. There are good deeds that come along with that. We'll finish it up in verse 19. In this way, they will lay up treasures for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life. See, accumulating stuff, that's not going to lead to an abundant life. That's not going to lead to a rich life. Being generous with what we have, being generous with our time, our talents, our treasures, that leads to an abundant life, to a rich life. And so the question for you this evening as you're watching this is, what are you going to be generous with? As we talked on Sunday, we said that we are simply a steward. We are a manager of what God has given us. So how are you going to manage it for God? What can you be generous with? And I'd like to suggest one thing, because local businesses are opening up again. And I just think it would be amazing as you and I become generous, not just in our deeds, but also with our wallets, is that for each and every one of us watching this video, that we would be so generous that we would walk into a restaurant, grocery store, a donut shop, whatever it is, and that when we are done purchasing whatever we've purchased, that little line item on the bottom of the receipt that says tip, would we be so generous to leave an abundant tip, a huge tip, an outrageously generous tip, a tip that is beyond expected, a tip that has a couple zeros on it? And listen, just think for a moment, what would that do if I did that, if you did that? What would that do for that business, for that owner that's not sure they're going to make payroll this week? That's thinking, man, I don't know how long we can sustain. We're probably going to have to shut down the business. What does it do for the employers at that place? And what does it do for their families? And if we do this in Linden, and this continues to spread beyond Linden, and we start impacting other people, and this whole thing goes, man, what would our neighborhood look like? What would our communities be like? I'm just convinced that none of this stuff is ours anyways. God has given it to us so that we could go and give it to other people as well. So for you, what's it going to be this week? How will you be outrageously generous with the wealth that God has given you to manage? I want to thank you for tuning in this week to the Spotlight. Hey, we only have 3 more, well, counting this one, we only have 3 more episodes left in this series and this season. So stay tuned as we wrap up in the next 2 upcoming episodes, and then stay tuned. We'll give you some more info on when the next season will roll out. Thanks for tuning in. I love you. God bless you, and we'll see you next week.